Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller here, along with Sam Ekstrom. And Sam, we've been talking about depth. We've been talking about the problems injuries could cause for this roster as it pertains to even D.D. Westbrook not being back or Christian Darrisaw not practicing yet. And then we get an out-of-nowhere, totally shocking surgery from Irv Smith Jr. on his meniscus. Now, we watched back the game the other night, watched it live. Irv Smith is playing well early on in the game, and then later in the game, he's doing a TV interview where he's all smiles. He's got his face paint on that looks like John Randall, and he looks like a happy man. And then all of a sudden, on Sunday, we get the news that he's going to have meniscus surgery. Now, meniscus surgery can go one of two ways. You can either have a short-term surgery that keeps you out for just a couple of weeks, and then Irv Smith could be back early in the season. But then there's also the season-ending surgery, and we don't know which way this is going to go. We actually saw two players deal with this in 2016, in Adrian Peterson and Sharif Floyd. But if we assume the best case scenario here for the Vikings, it still leaves them very short at tight end, where they love to play a lot of tight ends, Sam.
Yeah, this is not great. And it seems to be worse maybe than we even imagined on Sunday when we read the news, where the original tweet insinuated that maybe this would be a short-term thing. But Mike Zimmer says today that they don't know. They got to get in and look at the knee, and then they'll figure it out. So it could be the end for Irv Smith this season. I think that possibility exists, even though the Vikings certainly are holding out hope for a good result. Tyler Conklin did get a positive report from the head coach. Maybe he'll be ready for week 1, but they're shallow, man. I mean, Tyler Conklin has only been, sort of a number 2 tight end for 4 games in his career. Brandon Dillon has been kind of up and down and invisible a lot of times.
One career catch, by the way, for Brandon Dillon.
Yeah, and then Zach Davidson is a super raw 5th-round pick. Shane Zylstra is a converted wide receiver to tight end. So it's a bare cupboard right now at tight end. They're probably going to have to, as Mike Zimmer said, go 3 wide receivers more often. But I think they also have to look on the waiver wire, too. I mean, Chicago's got Jesse James, who's done some good things for Pittsburgh in the past. Maybe he hits the market. Vikings can claim him. I think they need another body there, because without Irv Smith, I mean, you certainly lose the body and you lose the blocking of Irv Smith, but you lose a pretty good weapon too on offense. This is a big loss. He might have been their 3rd best pass catcher.
Oh, no question about it. And speaking of the 3 wide receiver sets that they're going to have to start early in the season, we haven't seen D.D. Westbrook go through a whole practice yet, and that has to factor in too. So wide receiver 3 might be KJ Osborne. I guess all roads always lead back to KJ Osborne here, but that might be what they have to do. Is if Tyler Conklin is healthy, use him as the starter. You can't really trust Brandon Dillon or Zach Davidson. So then you have to go with, if it's KJ Osborne, if D.D. Westbrook is ready to go, maybe this actually forces them to keep Chad Beebe on the 53. Maybe by the time you're watching this, they'll have made that decision already. But a big change in the last minute here for an offense that really needs 2 tight ends. There's another idea that you could talk about too, which is trading for Zach Ertz is another potential option that they could look at. But just from the perspective of bad breaks, Irv Smith Jr. was probably, if you were ranking all players and how much they raised their stock during this training camp and preseason, I'd put Irv Smith Jr. maybe at number 1. I mean, I thought that he was looking like a true number 1 tight end, a playmaker who could go down the field, which the Vikings have not had a tight end in a very long time. It's mostly been underneath stuff, goal line stuff from that with Kyle Rudolph. And here's Irv Smith offering you something that not that many teams in the league have. Maybe 5 or 6 teams have, and he's on the shelf already. That puts so much pressure on Justin Jefferson, who's had an injury, and Adam Thielen, who's had an injury, and really Kirk Cousins to try to find other people to trust and get the football to, which we have not seen a ton from of Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson out.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many days this camp Kirk Cousins has actually had his full complement of weapons, because Dalvin Cook is perpetually pretty limited because they just don't want to use him a lot in practice. Justin Jefferson's been hurt for several weeks. Adam Thielen has had 2 minor injury issues, and now Irv Smith is going to be out for the foreseeable future. So, and the fact that Kirk hasn't had good chemistry with a lot of these backups is concerning. And, even though Kirk didn't have tremendous chemistry with Irv his first 2 years. He was also the number 2 to Kyle Rudolph. He was going to be the number 1 this year. Like, this was going to be a big difference, and I think he was going to generate a lot of targets. And the fact that he looked so good in the game, potentially playing with this injury, tells you that, man, imagine if he had been healthy and could get back healthy, what he could mean for this offense. But I think now you just wonder, even if he does come back, is he going to be the same? Is it going to be the same Irv Smith, 100% Irv Smith? And the answer might not be yes, depending on, how long this takes. And I'm guessing we'll find out maybe a little bit more this week.
And you bring up Dalvin Cook. There's another part of this, too, that over the last 2 years, Irv Smith has become a pretty reliable run blocker. I'm not saying that he is this monster who's going to be moving bodies, but when we watch him back closely on the coach's film and you look at the PFF grades and things like that, you see that he's at least average. He's solid. And now you go to Tyler Conklin, who's known as a decent blocker, but then after that, if Tyler Conklin's not 100% ready, or if they do have to use 2 tight ends in running situations, they don't have anybody that they can rely on as far as a blocker, which kind of circles back to the idea that they need to get somebody else. So I think what this says, once again, about the roster is how thin it is, and how if you cut one layer down, that there's an unusual drop. It's not just a drop from the starters to the backups, of course. It's the starter to Zach Davidson, who basically has played no football since 2019. And we saw that really play out in the preseason games. So I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at this, but that's sort of another big theme of this roster. And then there's just the idea that Irv Smith was somebody who was going to be relied on a ton. I mean, they made that decision to move on from Rudolph because they believed in Irv Smith. And I remember talking with fans about how, yeah, moving on from Rudolph should be okay, but not if somebody gets hurt. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
And they didn't really do anything to add depth to that position in free agency or the draft. I mean, other than Davidson, that was one of the few positions where they really said, we trust the guys we have. We think we have a good 1, 2, 3 with Smith, with Conklin, and with Dillon. And then Davidson came in to compete for that 3rd spot. But they definitely kind of took a gamble there. And unfortunately, it's backfiring right now for the Vikings. And the Zach Ertz suggestion that you made, that's pretty interesting. Vikings, I guess, unfortunately, have a history of trading with the Eagles in times of crisis. But, they've got Dallas Goedert there, and I think another good tight end behind him, too. So the Eagles could be looking to get out of that contract, but could the Vikings absorb that contract? I don't know. They might, they do have a history of looking at, a Blake Bell, a Cole Hicatini, guys that have a little bit of experience but aren't going to come with a big price tag. Chase Ford, you go back even a little further to 2014. They don't always get the flashiest players, but I think if they bring someone in, it's going to be someone who can block, because it's important for Kirk Cousins to remain protected in those 12 personnel sets.
All right, before we wrap up, give me one player that has to step up the most in the absence of Irv Smith Jr.
It's Conklin. I mean, it's 100% Conklin, because in those 4 games to end last year, it was very good. And Tyler Conklin proved that he could not only be sort of a big body to block and pave holes for Cook, he could catch the ball. So I think there might be an outside chance that he could fulfill that tight end 1 role. It's more about the tight end 2 that concerns me.
I'm Matthew Coller, Sam Ekstrom. Make sure you listen to our longer podcasts, Purple Insider, wherever you get your podcasts. purpleinsider.substack.com is where you can read our written work from TCO Performance Center. We'll catch you next time.